Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 15 and 16 of Steven Universe Future, Mr. Universe, and Fragments. So, let's recap. The last few episodes of Steven Universe Future have not been so kind to the aforementioned Steven Universe. Basically, we've been seeing that his mental health has been kind of going a little downhill. Due to he's been having fears that his friends will abandon him without needing him anymore, which in real life things have been kind of getting worse as his friends actually have been moving on with their lives and doing other things, and it's beginning to have a negative impact on Steven mentally, to the point where he's starting to kind of grab at anything he can just to try and keep himself stable. And one of those things was, sadly, Connie, which as she was kind of an emotional pillar for him and even helped him out when things were getting a little rough for him in some parts. But unfortunately, he kind of started pushing a little too far with Connie, as when he was afraid that she would be moving all the way across the country so that Steven wouldn't be able to see her anymore, he tried proposing that they get married and just fuse together as Stevani the whole time, but Connie kind of gave him a not now not now answer, which Steven interpreted as just a straight up no. And as a result, Connie went from being an emotional pillar to Steven to another detriment to his mental health, as he now feels like that he has no one, and unfortunately things start getting worse, as in his powers front, the pink power-up that he's been exhibiting is starting to flare up and causing his body to go through changes, growths, swelling, so to speak. And as such, when Connie checks in on Steven and learns about this, she sends Steven off to her mom, wherein Steven learns that, well, apparently the reason why Steven's been having having these emotional outbursts and fears coming to light and having such an impact on him, it's because all the traumas of his past have kind of weighed down on Steven's mind, essentially just put him through hell and back, to the point where anytime he deals with even a small problem, his body reacts as though he's in a life-threatening situation, with the glowing essentially being, as Dr. Maheshwaran put it, the gem equivalent of cortisol and stress. And unfortunately, Connie's not helping in the matter. Thankfully, Connie does still care about Steven and recognizes that she's part of the problem here, and thus she called Steven's dad to kind of take care of him, who in the end of the last episode, Steven's dad did manage to calm Steven down as he listened to Steven, learned that the outbursts are being caused by the failed proposal. And so last episode ended with Greg just kind of staying with Steven and essentially just being his comfort, just being there for comfort. And thus, that's where Mr. Universe picks up, as apparently 2 days have passed, and Steven's been doing alright. His mood has not improved, so to speak, but he hasn't been having any outbursts. He hasn't been going pink for a while, and the swelling is just gone. So as a result, it looks like physically Steven is fine. Mentally, however, he's still getting things worked out, and as such, as Greg tries comforting Steven by bringing him a bowl of ice cream, pie, and some whipped cream on top, Steven just kind of is a little out of it. As such, Greg decides to try and get his son to open up, and Steven talks about how, well, he doesn't really know what he wants to be right now. And what I like is that this does tie into what Steven's character arc was in the original series. That Steven spent so long wondering that he was his mom, that when he finally learned, no, I'm not my mom, I'm me, he's kind of wondering, well, who is Steven Universe? Well, who is he if there's no one there to protect, if there's no one there to help out, if there's no battle to be fought, then what does Steven have? What is there for him? What is there for him? What is he? And so Greg does actually give some solid advice. He talks about how when he was Steven's age, he didn't understand it. And it's basically the advice is essentially a rough equivalent of, you don't always need to know exactly what you're doing with your life. It's essentially just we're all just going down the weird path that is life, and Greg does not use those exact terminology. But put simply, it's okay to be a work in progress, and he tells Steven that when at his age, he was always doing weird things. He didn't exactly know what he was going to do with his life either, and he did some gigs here and there, and he played out of a few basements, but otherwise, how Greg discovered himself was by going on the road, seeing new sights, broadening his horizon, and as he talks about this, he thinks that maybe this is what Steven needs. After all, he might need a change in scenery. He might need to see new things. Yes, he's been to space, but has he seen other states? Has he seen these grand sights? After all, even Greg equates that some of his more formative moments have been like at gas stations and so forth. And so Steven kind of hears all this, and he starts thinking, yeah, maybe I do need a change of scenery. And as such, Steven and his dad go on the road, which what I love is that as they take Greg's van and go out, we get a montage of them going to different places, and we see that Steven's a little uncomfortable at first, but little by little he does get better with every location, as he and his dad do keep goofing off and doing, father-son dorky stuff. And the song they're listening to is the Dear Old Dad song from back when Greg injured his leg and was staying with the Gems while he recuperated. When he lied about how it was hurt when he lied when Steven healed it. But either way, it does look like this is actually doing well for Steven. It does look like that he kind of needed this. However, as they're continuing to travel, even going through a little suburb, Steven mentions how Steven is just kind of talking about how he maybe did need this, and Greg continues talking about all his formative years and about how when he was younger, he didn't really have I'm trying to remember the exact terminology because it's not coming back to me all at once. But put simply, Greg starts talking more about his childhood and about how he never really fully understood where his life was going to go either. But ultimately there were a lot of decisions that he made that did lead him to what he was. But he always had to kind of say, but it was a tough road. Even when he was younger, he didn't really understand. He didn't really have an interest in music because he never really had been exposed to music. Hell, at various points when he was younger, he had to sneak out past curfew so that the warden didn't see him. At first, Steven thinks that he must have been to prison, and Greg says, well, it was kind of like a prison. And so Steven asks him, well, then how did you become Mr. Universe? And Greg says, you know what? I don't need to tell you. I'll just show you. As such, as they go through the neighborhood, they end up pulling up to a house, and Steven's at first confused, wondering why the hell they're here, but Greg says it's like, good, they're not here, come on. As they get out, and, they perform some, breaking and entering. As Greg ends up jumping over the fence to this house and climbs up a tree to a window on the second floor. As such, Steven rightfully freaks out as he jumps up to the tree and follows his dad inside the house, and we see Greg inside this room that looks like it's just used for storage, as there's like faded areas on the wall where picture frames are held. It's just full of boxes of old junk, and we see Greg just going through all this with Steven and wondering why the hell is he stealing from why the hell are they breaking and entering? Greg's rich. He doesn't need to do all this shit. But Greg says that they'll just be in and out. So Steven decides, well, if they are going to be performing some B&E, then he's at least going to leave a note to whoever lives here to kind of explain themselves. As such, Steven goes downstairs and he begins kind of saying out loud what he wants to write in the note because, well, he wants to make sure he gets it all right. Though he also needs a pen and paper to do it, and, well, odds are they might have it somewhere, and Steven remarks that the home seems very lovely. They've got, it looks like very refined, they've got nice furniture, they got potpourri, they have a little fancy spoon collection, a pair of glass goats. Steven thinks it all looks so cute and nice and quaint and all that, but ultimately, he still has to try and find the pen and paper, and so he does find a pen, but paper is another story. Well, he does eventually find paper, though it's not one that he writes on. Rather, he finds a stack of letters, all of them unopened in a kitchen drawer. And as Steven examines the letters, he finds that the one who sent them was his dad. And the recipients, a Mr. and Mrs. DeMeo. Yeah, this is Greg's parents' house. And when Steven hears that, he just freaks the hell out as he runs upstairs. And when he asks Dad, oh my god, this is your house? Greg just immediately shoots it down and says, no, this is just my parents' house. And Steven wonders, well, where are your parents? And Greg mentions that apparently they have a timeshare reservation at in Florida Island, which I guess Florida's an island in this universe, but whatever. Point is, they go there every winter, so they're not here right now. And well, Greg talks about how apparently one year that he didn't go, they kind of freaked out. But either way, Steven's just like in marvel because this is finally seeing more about his dad's past. And that's when she begins looking through more of the boxes, and sure enough, it's all full of stuff that belongs to Greg. There's like little baby booties. There's a little picture of Greg. There's a yearbook from when he was in high school, and even Steven, when Steven finds his dad's picture, he remarks that Greg looks like him, except with braces and more human. And even remarking on this, Steven takes a picture of his dad when he was in high school, and when he looks through his signed yearbook photos, he finds that apparently a lot of people signed it. There was even one particular student that signed it a lot. So Steven's wondering, oh, what was going on there? But Greg is not too fond to be talking about his past, as apparently a lot of the things that were in that box, he's not fond of. Like, for example, the girl that seemed to sign the yearbook so much, well, Greg wasn't very fond of her. In fact, the only reason he even knew her was because they were in mathletes together. Something that Greg wasn't exactly okay with. And for that matter, as Steven continues looking through more of his dad's stuff, well, as he keeps bringing things out, Greg doesn't really seem to be reminiscing about anything. Like there's apparently something there from when he was in wrestling, but when he talks about it, Greg says that he didn't join it by choice. When Steven brings up a picture of his dad upon graduation, in the picture his dad looks miserable, and it's because apparently he got his hair cut, which his parents made him do which Greg didn't like because that was right before a gig, and likewise, apparently Greg didn't. Let me put it this way: Greg's childhood was essentially a regiment. Very in the end, when it came down to it, Greg's parents were very controlling, so to speak. They pretty much tried keeping everything in a certain way. And the thing is, Greg didn't always fit into that mold. And if he didn't fit, they made him fit. And so as a result, he did have things that one would usually have in a structured household, like curfews, chaperones, and so forth, but his parents didn't let him have any kind of freedom. It always had to be something go by them, and as a result, a lot of things that Greg liked, his parents disapproved of, to the point where if he wanted to try and get some good music, well, he'd have to hide it, which when Greg says that, he realizes what he's looking for. It's hidden in Event, and sure enough, he finds this old box in Event, which once he grabs it, he wants to head out. He wants to head out, though Steven says they could just use the door. As such, the pair of universes get back into Greg's van, though Greg says that Steven should drive, because after all, this is his journey of self-discovery, so he should be able to take the wheel. As such, once Steven's driving, he asks where they're going, but Greg says, anywhere you want to go, son. At which point, Greg does explain to Steven where the name Mr. Universe came from, as he pulls out a CD, and when he puts it in the van's radio, we hear a song played for it, and I know it's supposed to be like maybe, I don't know who it's supposed to be referencing, Queen, I think? I don't know. If you're a music aficionado, you'd be able to spot the reference better than I could, but point is, it's basically a slow rock song that's called Mr. Universe. Basically about finding your place in the universe, about everyone looks up to you, Mr. Universe. We're all happy to meet you, Mr. Universe. And for Greg, this was an eye-opening experience. And what I kind of appreciate is that this is kind of a for want of a nail kind of a situation. Because essentially, this CD, this song, it is what inspired Greg to get in his van and then just drive away. Go off to become Mr. Universe and all that stuff. Sorry, dog-related technical difficulties. But like I said, this song is what inspired Greg to go on to become Mr. Universe. And so, as a result, he pretty much just explains that this is where it all started. This is what made him want to expand his horizons, see new sights, actually have freedom. And now he's showing it to Steven, and he wants to know, what does it inspire in him? What does Mr. Universe do for Steven? And Steven has no idea what the hell is going on here. Basically, well, he's able to figure out that the song is where their last name comes from, but it doesn't really inspire anything within Steven. Again, sorry. Dog-related technical problems. But anyway, Steven hears all this and he thinks it's a lot of crock, because it's about expanding your horizons, seeing more of the universe. The problem is that Steven really doesn't need that kind of inspiration, because the problem is, Steven already had that freedom. Steven already grew up in a world without restrictions, because, well, his dad was pretty hands-off. His dad mostly let the gems raise Steven, and while he did intervene when he believed it was necessary, for the most part, Greg pretty much just let Steven do whatever the hell he wanted. And Steven starts calling him out on that, because he's like, why, I don't need freedom, I needed what you had back there. And he even starts talking about, like he needed restrictions, he needed those things, and he starts thinking maybe it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. And Greg's like, Steven, you don't know them, you don't know what it was like. And Steven even responds, well, it should have it couldn't have been worse than Mom's family. I had to go halfway across the universe just to see them. And Steven is just having it's just kind of getting angrier and angrier. At which point his dad's just saying, no, come on, Steven, you don't want that. You had actual freedom. But Steven is just losing it as he starts realizing his dad isn't helping. And basically his dad's solution to helping him is not what he needs, because Steven, like his dad said, he already had that freedom. He already could expand his horizons. And now look at him. He's on the verge of a mental breakdown. And guess what? He starts having an episode again. His skin starts growing pink as his grip on the steering wheel tightens, and he quickly realizes, oh my God, this whole time I've been seeing this all wrong. This whole time I've been thinking Mom's the problem, but no, you're just like her. Maybe the problem isn't that I'm a gem. Maybe the problem is that I'm a universe. At which point he yells that last line so hard that he actually pulls the steering wheel right out of the dashboard. And as a result, the van starts veering on the road and even almost hits a car. And so Steven has to slam down the brakes just to keep it from hitting them. But basically, with all the forward momentum, the van skids to a halt before rolling off the road and flying into a ditch. Which, yeah, this causes Steven to go unconscious. And when he wakes up, he finds his dad standing over him while the van is not totaled, but clearly banged up a bit. As such, Steven is now a bit calmer as he begins realizing what he did, and he asks if everything's okay, if no one's hurt, and Greg says it's fine, that the van's in one piece. But when he tries comforting Steven, he says, "You know what, son? I'm proud of you." Which even Steven's like, "What?" And Greg's like, "Yeah, I didn't have the courage to stand up to my old man like that or call him out." And yeah, this is not helping. If anything, it's just affirming more of what Steven thinks is wrong with this picture. And the end result, Steven, as Greg talks about how they can call someone to come and get the van, Steven pulls out his phone, finds the picture of his dad in high school that he took, and after an inhale and a sigh, he deletes it from his phone. And that's where the episode ends. And so Fragments picks up from that as we cut back to the temple Steven and his dad have managed to bring the van back there, and we see that Greg and Bismuth are looking the van over to see if it's salvageable, which it's not doing well, but it can at least be fixed. As such, Steven looks over this and feels kind of guilty about it as he goes inside, but meanwhile, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl are just kind of having their own little freakouts, because it's clear that whatever's going on with Steven is becoming much more of a serious problem, because one of his episodes nearly hurt him and Greg, which even Pearl is like, "Oh, these pink outbursts of yours are getting out of control," which, hearing that, causes Steven to have another episode as he says they're not outbursts before he swells up again and glows pink and has to calm down again. As such, the gems are beginning to realize that whatever's going on with Steven, it's clearly tied to his emotions, but the problem is they're trying a little too hard to get Steven to open up about these things. As Pearl wants to try and get to the source of all these problems, Garnet realizes that it's somehow tied to something serious that's going on with Steven, and likewise Amethyst is trying to be gentle. But likewise, all three of them have one thing in common. They're trying to get Steven to talk right here, right now. And while Steven is clearly still freaking out, he just thinks he needs some time alone right now. He needs to focus. But the gems are not letting him have that. They're pretty much just saying, "No, we gotta get this under control right now. Come on, Steven, you gotta talk to us." Or saying, "I think he's trying to avoid the conversation altogether." And Steven's just getting more and more upset because he just needs some space right now. But the gems keep pushing. They keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they keep saying, "Steven, come on, you gotta tell us what's going on. You gotta learn to control this thing. Steven, come on, we're right here. Come on, talk to us." And Steven is just getting angrier and angrier, and it's beginning to have it's causing him to get pink. It's causing him to start lashing out more, which is shaking the whole house. At which point, when the gems start closing in on him, trying to say, "Come on, Steven, you gotta talk to us right now," Steven finally just screams, "Leave me alone!" as the world begins slowing down. yeah, Steven's big power-up has made him run fast, been able to make him move fast again. At which point, Steven sees an opportunity and realizes he needs to get away from here, as he just leaves the beach house and goes to somewhere else. And by the time he goes back to normal speed, he's already gone. He's already left the temple. And where does Steven go? To Jasper. Basically, Steven knows that wherever he would go, the gems would find him. They know him too well, and they know where he would hide out. So, if Steven wants to get away from the gems and just have a moment to himself, well, he believes that hanging out with Jasper would be the last thing that would be the last place that anyone would look for him. And so, well, there he is, sitting around the campfire with Jasper and explaining the situation, which Jasper interprets as, oh, he wants a rematch. But Steven tries calming, says no, he doesn't want a rematch, he just wants to have some time for himself, but Jasper just kind of scoffs at that. At which point, she begins walking away and Steven follows her because, well, he kind of needs some help getting this all under control because he doesn't want, because like the gems, he doesn't like the gems, he doesn't want these outbursts to keep causing problems. But Jasper just, once again, scoffs at this, and I'll give her some credit here. There is some line of logic in what she's about to say. Basically, she thinks that the crystal gems are holding Steven back, which that part I don't think is a problem because, well, the crystal gems have been continuously shown to be one of Steven's strengths. But the thing is, what she really means in that statement is that the crystal gems are afraid of Steven's new powers, and by extension, so is Steven. They're afraid of him losing control. They're afraid of everything. They're afraid of everything. But whereas with Jasper, she doesn't have to worry about control because she lives and breathes power. She's a soldier bred to fight, and now that she has no war to fight in, no generals to serve, all she has left now is training, ways to hone the power, focus it, control it, and that's what she does. And essentially, she's just trying to tell Steven, that's what you need to do as well. And again, I think this line of logic works. The thing is, the pink powers may be tied to Steven's overinflated emotions, and the thing is, Steven is having a hard time controlling those emotions. But ultimately, the pink power-up is just that. A power-up. It's an extension of Steven's abilities, and like all of his other powers, if Steven can learn to control it, he can utilize it in a much more controlled fashion. He can basically instead of having him freaking out and causing the ground to shake with him yelling or him to swell up whenever he gets upset, instead he can just learn to harness the power and focus it, much like all of his other abilities. And I don't think that that's a bad line of logic. Hell, she even talks about she even tries to tell Steven that it's okay to, well, open up and channel the raw fury into constructive places. Case in point, when she talks to Steven, when she's telling Steven about about letting all that anger out and all that rage, that's not a bad bit of advice. Because the thing is, when it comes to anger, letting it out in a controlled environment, venting in a place that you know you can deal with it, that's very healthy. And part of the reason why Steven is reacting the way he is because he's been bottling all these emotions up. Especially since, well, the last time he vented to someone, it didn't go so well. Steven. So the idea of Steven now So the idea of Jasper telling Steven that he can let it all out and that maybe letting it all out will feel good, those aren't bad bits of advice, as that probably would help in the long run. And if he learned to properly harness these pink powers in the right fashion, then they could be a valuable asset rather than hurting people because Steven is feeling unwell. So I will say this. There is a line of logic to her madness. But in that regard, when Steven will ask Jasper to teach him about how to use his powers, Jasper says she won't do it unless Steven fights her. And Steven says he won't fight her unless she trains him. So, she concedes. And as such, Steven and Jasper begin training. And, well, they actually are making progress, as, well, it is kind of a learning curve, because in order to properly utilize the pink powers, Steven has to kind of get in a right mindset, and since the mindset is negative emotions, not very easy for Steven to do. Hell, early on, before Jasper made, or Steven asked Jasper to train him, at one point he tried punching a tree and he felt so bad about it he kissed the tree, and the kiss actually not only healed the tree but the grass, which led to honestly a very funny scene where Jasper started freaking out and told Steven, "Quit helping the local ecosystem recover." It's hilarious. And even also another funny scene was when she said that she would train Steven. She said, when Steven got excited about it, she said, "Rule 1, no smiling." And Steven's like, "I've seen you smile before." At which point she kicks him in the she punts him in the stomach. We're saying, "Rule 2, shut up." I don't know, that's funny. But from there, we do end up getting a montage as, over the course of 2 days, we see Steven training with his pink powers, actually learning to properly utilize them in regular situations, actually being able to harness them as viable weapons. He's able to create pink structures from them. He's able to move faster with them. He's able to be strong. He's able to actually be stronger. He's able to actually utilize it in a controlled environment. And we see that apparently prolonged use of the pink powers does have an effect on Steven's physicality, as over the course of these 2 days, Steven starts bulking up. He starts getting taller, his hair starts growing out a little bit more. He gets a little bit of stubble on his face. Basically, it's clear that utilizing the pink powers does make Steven grow a little. It's just that whereas before he was swelling up and growing into misshapen sizes, here it's actually in a more controlled and stable environment, and so Steven is able to constantly utilize it. So again, this part is not bad. The idea of Steven being able to actually let out these emotions and channel them into something proper and actually something constructive, that actually works. And basically, who better to teach him about strength than Jasper? Jasper is probably one of the strongest gems that Steven and Co have ever faced. And she's not wrong. She's a warrior. She has power up the wazoo, and anything that Steven can throw at her, she thinks she can take. And so basically, over the course of these 2 days, we see Steven just getting better and better to the point where he actually starts feeling comfortable in his new form. He's actually getting a little confident, which even leads to a funny scene where after Jasper compliments him about all the progress he's made in just 2 days, Steven flexes his muscles and then kisses his arm, and Jasper's like, "I didn't teach you to do that." But ultimately, the evening of the second day, Steven finally tells Jasper that he thinks he's ready. As he tells her he's ready for their rematch, and Jasper happily once again takes him up on the offer. And so the two of them spar, and ultimately this sparring session does go a little bit better for Steven than the last one. I mean, I think he won the last one too, but in this case, Steven is actually able to keep up with Jasper and able to match her blow for blow. But unfortunately, he's still holding himself back, as Jasper is starting to up the ante more and more, especially when she summons her helmet, which, I apologize if I mentioned this before when I talked about Steven Universe Future, but I love how her helmet actually has little tusks and horns, that kind of resemble when she was corrupted. That's a cool little detail, and I kind of love the idea of Jasper wearing that like a badge of honor, so I kind of dig it. But ultimately, Jasper begins upping the ante, and she begins telling Steven to just stop holding back, as she ends up pounding him right into a boulder, and Steven is just getting more anxious as she keeps trying to say, "Do you want to go back?" As Jasper tells him, "Do you want to go back to your friends?" It's like, no. It's like, do you want to show them what you are? Do you want, why are you holding yourself back? Or are you just too weak? And yeah, she hits the right button right there as Steven just yells out in anger and charges at her. And he stops holding back. He just goes all out against her. He starts summoning more shields, having greater control of them, creating pink constructs. He flies around the area at supersonic speeds, matching Jasper blow for blow, landing more hits than even she can block. And she's just laughing the whole time, telling him, "Yes, this is what you are. Embrace this power. Embrace all these emotions. It's great to let it out, isn't it?" And as Steven keeps fighting her, he starts laughing. He starts smiling. It's clear he's getting more and more into it, to a very unhealthy degree. It's clear that Steven's kind of starting to lose it, and what was once a controlled environment is now very much a deranged one, as Steven's negative emotions start getting the better of him. He's happily letting them all out on Jasper. And he's not stopping. He just keeps going and going and going. And for the most part, Jasper is able to take it. But Steven manages to knock her into the ground. And he just flies in the air as he throws out 4 construct shields that when she gets up, they fly around her and just box her in. She can barely move. And Steven just floating up there laughing as he's glowing pink. And the irises of his eyes, they turn into little diamonds. And Steven, with a malicious smile on his face, says, "You're right, Jasper. I have been holding back," as Steven just summons a giant wall of Pink's constructs that grow spikes out of them before throwing it right at Jasper at high speeds. And all Jasper can do as it gets closer is just widen her eyes in fear and gasp before the screen goes black and we hear a crash of thunder. At which point, we cut back to the temple on a rainy day, as we see Steven back in his regular form, no longer glowing pink, as he's just rushes right into the shack. Inside are the gems, as they're wondering where the hell Steven is, and when he bursts through the door, they're just like, "Oh my god, Steven! Steven!" And they try and say it, "We've been looking everywhere for you." Steven just brushes past him and tells them not right now, before he runs into the bathroom and locks the door behind him. At which point he runs to the tub, fills it with water, and then he grabs the vials of the essence of yellow, blue, and white diamond. And then he doesn't even put drops in. Like, he just throws the containers right into the tub. Not even a droplet like in the first episode. And as we see what Steven wants to restore, he opens up his hand, and we see the remains of Jasper's gem, now in pieces. Yep, Steven shattered her. And Steven is horrified. Now he's managed to grab all of Jasper's pieces, and he manages to fit them back together in their proper places, but that alone is not enough to restore Jasper. At which point he dunks her gem into the water in his hand, and he just starts crying as he just apologizes to Jasper, saying that he didn't mean for it to go this far, that he just wants her to come back, to please come back. As he starts crying, and the tears land in the water and begin intermingling with the essences of yellow, blue, and white. And for a few seconds, nothing happens. Until finally all the colors coalesce, and a light begins forming in Steven's hands. And when Steven lets go, it begins growing. As, well, it works. Jasper reforms. Her gem is healed. And thus when Jasper comes back into her being, she freaks out because from her perspective, she was almost killed. She was killed. And we see that that her being shattered did have more physical ramifications for her, as one of her horns from when she was corrupted now has a stub on it instead of it being a full-on horn. And the thing is, she had a mark on her face before. Now there's like a little cut over one part over that mark, implying that that's where the fatal wound was. And as she's there, and basically she quickly puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that Steven shattered her. At which point, Steven just goes into full damage control mode, and he just apologizes to hell and back, saying that he shouldn't have done that, he went too far, that he should have stopped, but Jasper just doesn't say a word. She just looks at Steven solemnly before she gets out of the tub and bows to him. And, well, the next word she says shakes Steven up even more, she says that she bows to his superior strength, before calling him her diamond. And the episode ends as Steven realizes, and Steven just says, "Oh no." So yeah, things got worse. My thoughts on these episodes. So, Mr. Universe. This is much like with how last week's episodes were essentially showcasing Steven kind of losing Connie as a support due to the failed marriage proposal. Well, Mr. Universe is essentially that, but for Greg. Now, in this regard, I will say the difference between Greg and Connie is that where Connie failed for Steven, or at least in his eyes, is that she didn't want the same thing as Steven. Connie wanted to kind of live her own life and do her own thing without feeling like she had to be tied to Steven. She wanted to do stuff on her own. And while she still wanted to be a part of Steven's life, she wanted to be there for him, and if she was in danger, she would come and support him, no questions asked. But the problem is that where the split came between her and Steven is that Steven began trying to over rely on on their relationship to try and help himself out, bring him out of the muck, so to speak. And when he learned that he couldn't do that, it kind of hit him hard because Steven didn't want to accept that. He didn't want to believe that this couldn't be the solution he wanted. And unfortunately, Connie saying no just in Steven's eyes made him believe that she didn't want to be with him like he wanted to be with her. And as a result, Steven had to kind of keep her at arm's length to try and calm himself down. Now, what helped Steven calm down is that Connie recognized this issue and realized that she needed to give Steven his space and make sure that he was with people he could feel safe with. And then when he was in a proper mind space, they could meet up again and talk about it. And of course, that's why she called Greg. Steven trusts Greg. He's his dad. And to Greg's credit, he wants to be there for Steven. He wants to help him out and help him work through these problems. The only issue is that he doesn't know how. Oh, he's trying. And in some regards, he does give some genuinely good advice to Steven. Like when Steven talks about how he spent so much time trying to figure out if he was his mom, that when he finally realizes that he's him, that he really doesn't know who he is as a person, Greg is able to actually give some sound advice, saying that when he was Steven's age, he didn't want to do he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life either, and that it took him going through these different experiences to help him realize that. And that in itself is not bad advice. That Steven wants to learn who he is when he isn't trying to help people. He needs to actually do some things on his own, and yeah, he needs to do some things on his own. Actually experience some things without feeling like that his life's in danger. That alone is not bad advice. The problem is that Steven and Greg's situations are not equatable. Here's the thing. If we're going to go with what Greg told us about his parents, about how they were controlling, about how they always disapproved of Greg's lifestyle because that didn't fit into their little box. Well, then in that situation, Greg's solutions are applicable because if we believe how Greg grew up, if we believe Greg that he grew up essentially in a metaphorical prison, then well, it makes sense why he would want to lash out. Why getting even a taste of freedom would be so appealing to him, because he essentially grew up in his parents' own little world, always doing what they wanted to do. And if he disobeyed them or did things that they didn't want, then they would get angry at him. They would freak out at him. Basically, they wanted Greg to fit into a specific mold for them, and Greg didn't want to do that. He wanted to break away from them and do his own thing. And as a result, all these solutions that Greg tries throwing out, they work in that regard, because Greg grew up in a situation that kind of needed that freedom. He grew up in an environment that was too restricting, and so when he got a taste of freedom and he heard the Mr. Universe song, of course that would inspire him, because it's talking about seeing grander sights, exploring the universe, being a part of everything, being something greater being a part of a larger whole. Of course that would appeal to Greg. The problem is, Steven doesn't need that. Steven does not need to broaden his horizons, because Steven already has freedom. And the reason why he has that freedom is, unfortunately, because of his dad. And the thing is, when I say freedom, the word alone does not sound like a bad thing. But the thing is, freedom and structure kind of go hand in hand. While it's a good thing to allow children to develop, discover themselves, and have fun, because it allows them to discover what they want to be in their lives, what direction they want to go in when they get older, and what kind of people they want to grow up into, they do need structure, something they can come home to, something that's consistent in their lives that they can rely on. And the thing is, Steven didn't have that. Oh, yes. He had the gems. They were always a part of his life, and they were always a part of his life, and he always had Greg. Greg always made sure to be there for his son. But the problem is, Greg was very hands-off when it came to raising Steven. And while he was always there to help Steven out whenever a situation called for it, he always got worried about Steven if something happened that looked like it was going to endanger his son's life. Hell, when Steven told Greg about the time he was abducted by Jasper and Peridot, Greg nearly had a panic attack just because of how worried for Steven he was. Basically, but the thing is, Greg just kind of sits back and let the gems do most of the work. For him, he was there for the basic stuff, but he'll essentially just let Steven do whatever he wanted. And that's the problem. Steven had too much freedom. There was no structure. And so as a result, part of the reason why Steven is having his freak out is because he feels like he's losing the little bits of structure that he has built up. Part of the reason why he freaked out at the little graduation ceremony was because he learned that all of his friends were going off and doing things that that had nothing to do with him, that he was losing that part of his life. The one thing that and on top of that, there was the whole him no longer feeling like he was needed fear, because, well, the universe was safe. What good is Steven Universe when there's no when there's no crisis to fight? And then of course, there's Connie. Connie was someone that he thought he could always turn to, and now he feels like he's losing her too. And so when Steven sees this stable, quaint little environment that Greg grew up in, it was something that he could always return to, something that could give him structure, some consistency. Steven wants it. Oh, for sure. If Steven grew up in that environment, he'd probably hate it just as much as Greg. But he didn't grow up in that environment. He grew up in an environment where his dad let him go off and fight monsters with these magic gem ladies who let him go to space just because he had to go and fight their leaders, who let him have a pet lion that could teleport. Who's consistently been hands off with Steven's life because Steven has been part gem, and that has hurt Steven in the long run. Steven should not have been allowed to do most of that stuff. Or at the very least, if he was going to be integrated into this life, it should have been at a slower pace. Because yes, he is part gem. That is something that Greg can have no control over, especially since he fell in love with Rose Quartz. In that regard, of course, Steven does still need to be involved with that side of his life. But if Steven really wanted to be this hero, then sadly he might have needed to wait a while. Now, to be fair, there were some crises in the original show that Steven definitely needed to be there for. So in that regard, yes, Steven was necessary there. Steven was something Steven had to step in. And I will not say that Greg's a bad parent, because he always worried about Steven and he always wanted to keep him safe. Hell, when Jasper and Peridot first arrived on Earth, he wanted to take Steven and GTFO out of Beach City because he didn't want him getting hurt. But the thing is, when it came down to all the big important stuff, all the gem fighting, Greg just stood back and let his son do it all. No restrictions mindset didn't just extend to that. Even when Steven had his freak out, he mentioned how he never went to school, how he never had been to a doctor until 2 days ago. Basically, Steven's just not doing... Basically, Steven has had no consistency in his life. And while Greg defends that, and while Greg defends all of this, instead, he basically none of it is what he wants to hear, because he just says, "Well, you're a gem. They wouldn't know what to do with you." Except Steven is still part human, and on top of that, again, he doesn't know how to socialize with people because he never grew up in school. That's the problem. It's just I know I'm hammering this point home, but ultimately, Steven did not have structure. Where if Greg's parents had imposed too many restrictions, then Greg didn't impose enough. he gave Steven too much freedom, and as a result, that allowed Steven to get into situations where his life was put in mortal danger, and those situations had a negative impact on him. He doesn't need to expand his horizons because he's seen a lot more than Greg even has. He's been to space. He's fought dictators. He has almost been killed on numerous occasions. And so as a result, this big formative thing for Greg, this Mr. Universe song that inspired him to expand his horizons and see new sights, means jack shit to Steven because it doesn't apply to him. This is not something that he needs. He doesn't need to expand his horizons. He needs something he can rely on, something that can be consistent. And unfortunately, that's not Greg right now, because Greg has no idea how to relate to Steven in this regard. Greg is happy to have this freedom. Greg is happy to go on the road, not have a home, just always living out the back of his van, and ultimately working out of a car wash. But Steven is not that kind of kid. But Steven, he needs that structure. He needs calm. He needs to have something he can return to without having to worry about someone having to rely on him. And Greg is not giving that. Hell, even when Steven crashes the van, Greg, instead of Greg rightfully apologizing to Steven, I'm saying, I'm sorry, I don't know, I do want to be there for you, Steven, I just don't know what I need to do, but I'll figure it out. He instead just keeps going the whole let Steven have his freedoms route by saying, I'm proud of you, I didn't have the courage to call my old man out. Basically, it's just going down the same path because he has no idea what to do with this kid. He has no idea how to help him. He's trying. I'll give him that. He's trying. And I will not go so far as to say that Greg is an awful parent. Like I said, he has been there to try and support Steven. He has helped him out on numerous occasions, and he does try to make sure that Steven and he at least tries to make sure that Steven grows up to be a healthy individual. It's just that his methods to try and help Steven achieve that are not always the right methods. And so seeing Greg here pretty much just telling Steven, oh, it's okay, you did nothing wrong here, kid, you just keep staying the course, it's not the right thing to help Steven. And as a result, this is what leads to Steven essentially leads to Steven no longer seeing his dad as a viable support system, because his dad cannot relate to him, not on a human matter, and certainly not on a gem matter, because the situations that defined Greg are not the same situations that need to define Steven. Steven doesn't need more freedom, he needs something structural. He doesn't need to expand his horizons, he just needs some quiet. He needs someone to talk to. He needs someone to relate to. And sadly, Greg can't relate to his son. And that's what ultimately causes the divide in that regard. And as a result, this begins having a much more negative impact on Steven, especially since, well, he begins seeing seeing his dad in the same light he's been seeing his mom. He thinks that he's part of the problem, that he kept him away from all this structure. And as a result, Steven does not want to have anything to do with his dad right now. Without another viable support system, Steven starts kind of dipping back into the negativity, which, it doesn't help him in the long run, as we saw in Fragments. But in that regard, Mr. Universe definitely kind of hits home just how much that helps emphasize part of the reason why Steven is the way he is right now. Because ultimately, while Greg wasn't an awful parent, at the same time, his parenting methods were not the best either. They did help contribute to why Steven is the way he is, and unfortunately, Greg is not the kind of person that Steven needs right now, as he's equating Steven's situation to his own, and ultimately, they're not the same. They are not the same, and it's not helping. So, in that regard, definitely a what the fuck episode, but which is good in that regard. But as for the Fragments episode, this one is where things just really hit a breaking point, and figuratively and literally in this case. As, like I said, we're at a point when Steven is essentially closing off everybody, because he's looking at all of his former support systems, and none of them are what he needs right now. He doesn't want to talk to Connie because he still feels pent up and upset because of the failed proposal. He doesn't want to talk to his dad because his dad genuinely does not understand what he's going through, and he can't talk to the Gems because the Gems are not seeing this as an emotional issue, they're seeing this as a power issue. And as a result, they're not understanding what's going on in Steven's psyche. They're not understanding that Steven kind of needs to calm down before he can open up about these things. At least with Greg tried giving Steven his space. That's why Steven was able to hold out for as long as he was when he was under Greg's care. Because Greg actually was trying to give Steven a place where he could calm down. It's just, like I said, the fault in there is that he couldn't relate to Steven's problems. So in the Gems case, they're trying to solve, like with Steven before, they're trying to solve this issue as quickly as possible. But the thing is, when you have these negative issues, you can't force someone to open up. Rather, you need to let them open up to you. And if you keep trying to push the issue, keep trying to force it, then it's not going to make them want to open up. It's just going to close them off even more and cause them to lash out. And that's what happens with Steven in the beginning of Fragments, because as the Gems keep trying to fix the issue and say, no, we got to get this under control, you got to tell us what's going on, Steven starts getting more and more upset until he lashes out again and realizes that if he wants to get control of all this, he needs to go somewhere else, hence why he seeks out Jasper. And like I said, what the advice that Jasper gives Steven is not inherently bad advice, because part of the reason why Steven is reacting the way he is because he has no outlet for these negative emotions. He doesn't want to vent about them to anyone, considering what happened with Cactus Steven, and likewise, the powers have been showcased to be very violent in nature and can have destructive consequences. So Steven is afraid of going all out with them when he's around people. So of course he's not going to try training with them if those are the ramifications. So in that regard, when Jasper tells him that he needs to train with these powers, get them under control, and actually be able to vent those emotions in a proper environment, that's not inherently a bad bit of advice. Because, again, the pink power-up is just another extension of Steven's powers. And much like all of Steven's other abilities, like the bubble, him summoning his shield, him learning his floating powers, the healing spit, all of those are things that he learned to control. And likewise, the pink power-up is something similar. And as such, if Steven can properly control the emotions that spawn the pink power-up, then he might be able to properly utilize it without, hurting innocent people in the ensuing crossfire, without hurting innocent people, like, so to speak. So essentially, like I said, on top of that, venting it, and on top of that, Jasper can take most of Steven's punishment. He can go all out with her because she's just that strong. So it helps for Steven actually be able to vent those negative emotions in an environment where he doesn't have to worry about someone getting hurt. I like that a lot. Like, I think I just stated that. But my point is that Jasper's advice is not inherently bad. The only problem is Jasper kept pushing. And therein lies where everything goes wrong. It's okay to vent negative emotions in a controlled environment where you know that what you're doing can not hurt anyone or hurt you or doesn't actually impact other people. It actually allows you to get these emotions out instead of keeping them bottled up where they can cause you long-lasting harm. But there's a difference between venting an emotion and letting it consume you. And unfortunately, as Steven is training with Jasper, the negative emotions overcome him. He loses himself to his anger, his rage, his fears. He lets them take over. And as a result, Steven stops being the carefree kid who cares about everybody. He instead turns into a very violent individual who, essentially, he stopped seeing Jasper as a teacher. He stopped seeing her as another person and just as a punching bag. And in that regard, it kind of reminds me of when Jasper was fused with Lapis, about how Lapis took out her frustrations out on Jasper. And While Jasper would always be one to say that she can take it, even hell, she even tells Steven in this environment that whatever he wants to do, he can do it because she can survive it. The problem is that Steven goes too far. And by letting these emotions consume him, by letting them overtake him, he hurts someone. He shatters Jasper, and it it hurts, and basically it causes him to freak out. It causes him to be scared because that's something that Steven would never do. And it all happened because Steven lost control. Now, here's the thing. Up until Jasper mentioned how weak Steven was, he was handling the emotions in a very controlled way. Like I said, inherently Jasper's advice is not bad advice. It's a good if these powers are as dangerous as as the gems and Steven think they are, then it's best to learn to get them under control. And since they're tied to Steven's anger, his rage, his sorrow, and so forth, then it makes sense to to try and train with them in a proper environment. But Jasper is not one to have limits. Jasper is not one to rein it in when things are getting dangerous. That's why the crystal gems are there. While the crystal gems were pushing too far for Steven to open up about his problems, that they also are the stability in Steve. They're, like I said, like I kind of mentioned, they too try to be a stable part of Steven's life. And likewise, I like to believe that if they were there during Steven's training, if they were willing to at least pull back enough to let Steven try and master his new powers, I think if it got to the point where he started losing control, they could be that little voice in his head that tells him, that's enough. You've done enough. But they weren't there. Steven pushed them away. And I'm not going to defend what they did to have them get pushed away. After all, they were trying to force Steven to open up when he was clearly not comfortable doing so. And then, like I said, when you're put in that environment, it just causes you to lash out and close yourself off even more. But ultimately, without having that without having them there as the metaphorical little angel on his shoulder, Steven gave in to the negativity. He gave in to the darkness. He gave in to his anger. And it caused him to hurt someone. And this happened all while Steven was trying to get these emotions under control. And imagine that. You're feeling like you're constantly under stress. You feel like you're losing control of your powers, of yourself, all because of all the traumas you experienced when you were younger. And now you're trying to actually release that pent-up anger and aggression in a controlled environment, only to lose control and have that anger result in someone getting hurt, someone getting killed. Imagine the guilt that Steven feels, and imagine how much worse he would feel having Jasper be the one to acknowledge Steven as her diamond. Because, well, Steven doesn't want to be a diamond. Hell, even earlier in the episode, when he was talking to Jasper about all this, he actually mentioned how he thinks his diamond powers are coming in. And that was part of the reason he wanted to rein them in. Because the diamonds are the bad guys. Now, they're not the bad guys anymore. They're trying to be better. They're trying to be good people, especially since they know Steven's a good person, and if he did not want to have anything to do with them when they were mighty conquerors who conquered who invaded planets and hollowed them out for their colonies. No, they're trying to be better. They're trying to be better for him. But that doesn't mean that Steven likes him. We saw that in Steven Universe, the movie. Despite the fact that Steven is willing to work with them, it's clear he's a little awkward around them. He doesn't want to be around them, and when they try showing up, he just kind of rolls his eyes at them. And now here he is being acknowledged as a diamond. And it's coming from Jasper, who part of the reason why she didn't respect Steven before was because she still thought he was weak. while she wouldn't attack him because of his relation to Pink Diamond, she never acknowledged him as her better. She still thought of him as a weakling who was not even up to par with Pink Diamond in terms of strength. And now, how does Steven finally get her fealty? By shattering her. By showcasing that he is that powerful. By showcasing that if he wanted to, he could destroy her without a second thought. And that's what finally gets her to say, "Congratulations, kid. You're my better." And that shakes Steven up even more. And so now Steven even further isolates, and this further isolates Steven. As before, he was shutting everyone out because he needed to find a way to organize these thoughts. But then when he loses control and does something that he regrets, he now doesn't believe that he deserves that help. He now thinks that he has to just deal with this on his own now because they're good guys. The gems are good people. And they wouldn't want to be associated with a monster like him. Which I'll get more into that when we get to the next pair of episodes, because it comes back hard. But it's a very realistic mindset when you're going downhill. And let me just say, the phrase "you don't know what I've done" tends to stick when you hate yourself. And Steven very much has reasons to hate himself now. A lot more than he did before. So, yeah, that's even more terrifying. But to get away from the serious mental breakdown angle of this episode with Steven and his anger issues and his mental state and how he's dealing with the PTSD and all that nice little mental health stuff, let's talk about Jasper. The thing is, ever since Jasper was reformed, people wanted a redemption arc for her. Why? I don't know, because people thought she was cool? I have no idea. But for me, Jasper was always one of those gems that I feel like she didn't need a redemption arc. It's okay for people to still be assholes, because as we've shown, not everybody wants to be helped. And Jasper, well, she actively scorned any aid that Steven tried to give her. She smacked it away and pretty much just spat in his face every time he tried to be friendly with her. So it makes sense why in Steven Universe future, despite the fact that Steven has restored her, she still wouldn't have a high opinion of him. Even knowing that he's the son of Pink Diamond, if anything, that just makes the opinion worse. Because he's supposed to be the son, because he's not just the son of Rose Quartz, the leader of the Crystal Gem Rebellion that fought against Homeworld. He's the son of Pink Diamond, one of the four head honchos of the entire Gem Empire, whose screams are so loud they could shake a room, whose destructive powers were amazing. And yet Steven is always holding himself back and coddling people, trying to be super friendly, and Jasper is disgusted by that. Because when it comes down to Jasper, strength is what she respects. When it comes down to Jasper, she is not a friendly type of person. She doesn't want to get to know someone, but she doesn't want to get to know people. She'd rather fight them. She doesn't want to make friends with people. She'd rather exchange fists with them. She would rather train. She would rather be used for a war, and she loves it. She is a fighter in every sense of the word. Hell, in the first episode of Steven Universe Future, when Steven challenged her to a fight, her face lit up like a Christmas tree just because she finally got the chance to fight someone. Yes! Her opinion of Steven was still low, but hey, if he wanted to trade blows, she'd be happy to do it. And that's what Jasper is. She respects strength above all else. And if you want to change Jasper's mind about something, then you need to show the strength of adapting that kind of mindset. Case in point, when Jasper first arrived on Earth, her opinion of fusion was that it was just a trick that weaker gems used to make themselves feel stronger, and as a result, she had a very low opinion of Garnet. But then she fought Garnet one-on-one, so to speak, without the use of the destabilizer, and Garnet whooped her ass. She beat her, she took her down, and likewise in every subsequent battle that involved fusions, Jasper lost, even though she's supposed to be the ultimate quartz soldier. And suddenly Jasper starts thinking, maybe fusion isn't all that bad. And suddenly and the thing is, Jasper's already strong. She can already handle herself well in a fight, and she can easily take down a good many gems just with her bare hands. So what happens if you add fusion to the mix? And well, when she actually tries fusion, she loves it. When she fuses with lapis to form malachite, when she was in control of the fusion, she reveled in it. She loved the added boost of power because she was already strong. And even as Malachite, she was kicking ass. When Malachite and Alexandrite duked it out in the original show, she was able to match her blow for blow, and she practically overpowered Alexandrite. And the only reason she failed was because of the intervention of the Watermelon Stevens. So basically, and on top of that, add on her natural strength combined with Lapis's aquakinesis, she loved it. She wanted to keep trying fusion, and despite the fact that her relationship with Lapis was abusive, she wanted it back. She wanted that extra power because she loved having that extra power. Her opinion on fusion changed from that point on because she saw the strength in it. But then, kind of going off on that same token, it's a similar case with Lapis. Before, Lapis was a means to an end for her. But before they fused, she saw her as a tool to learn about the crystal gems on Earth and act as intel. They interrogated her. She interrogated her, held her prisoner, and ultimately only kept her around because she thought that she'd be a viable asset if they needed more information on Earth. But then ultimately, when she wanted to kill the crystal gems, she wanted to try and use Lapis to get more powerful, but that ultimately blew up in her face. But then when she and Lapis refused as Malachite, Lapis showed her strength. She beat Jasper down, kept her in line all that time, and ultimately, while their relationship can only be equated to an abusive one, Jasper grew to respect Lapis to the point where when they were forced to unfuse, Jasper wanted to go back to it. She sought Lapis out and then practically begged her to fuse with her again because she thought and she even kept trying to convince Lapis, no, it's okay. It'll be better now. It'll be fine. It'll all be nice. And at that point, she began respecting Lapis because she saw how brutal she could be in that fusion. She saw how powerful she could be, and she felt nothing but respect. What to anybody else would be seen as abuse, Jasper saw as strength, and that's what she liked. And I'm not saying that that's a healthy mindset. God, no. It's still abuse. It's still abuse no matter what angle you look at it from. But from Jasper's point of view, it was still something. It still showed that Lapis was stronger than her, and that made Jasper respect her. And and that's why I think this redemption arc for Jasper, it's the only way that Jasper could have been redeemed, because at the end of the day, strength is what Jasper respects above everything. You can't appeal to her better nature because there is no better nature with her. She only lives to fight. She only lives to train. If she's not fighting, she's training. If she's not training, she's fighting. That's what Jasper's whole existence is. And ultimately, without any leaders to serve, she just wants to keep training. And part of the reason why she didn't respect Steven was because she thought he was weak. Even throughout, even in the times when he's fought her and won, he only beat her because he was a fusion. By himself, he couldn't take her in a fight, and she looked down on him for that, even despite the fact that he was the son of a diamond. She pretty much just said, "Yeah, I know you're the kid. I know you have a diamond in your chest, but I don't care. You're a weakling, and I'm gonna tell you to fuck off because that's what you are. You're weak." So the idea of Jasper finally conceding to Steven, finally willing to go along with him, to listen to him, all because he shattered her, that's enough. That's all it takes for Jasper to recognize him. Because, well, that shows her that Steven was that powerful from the outset. Steven could have easily taken her out, but he chose not to. because that's just his mercy, so to speak. Steven is powerful enough to shatter her, and that all she needed was that proof. And Steven fighting her in battle, completely overpowering her and completely obliterating her, that's all she needed. That was the only way that she could be brought over to the side of the crystal gems, by being shown their strength. Hell, back in the original series, she only respected Rose Quartz because she respected her as a leader. She thought she was strong. And when she thought that Steven was Rose, she started thinking lesser of Rose because she thought that Rose took on a weaker form. But again, upon realizing that upon essentially being shown that Steven was greater than her, she conceded. And that's why I think this was the only way that Jasper could be redeemed. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't nice, but if you wanted Jasper to listen, you couldn't use honeyed words. You needed to show her strength. And, well, whether Steven liked it or not, he showed it to her. And, yeah, it's not going to sit right with him. But after this, Jasper starts listening to him. Hell, to kind of give a later spoiler, in the final episode in the series, we see she's actually living at Little Homeworld now. Yeah, clearly she does start respecting Steven more after this. So, yeah. With that out of the way, though, these two episodes are very much where things start hitting, where the shit starts hitting the fan. Steven is very much losing more and more control, not just of his powers, but of his emotions. He's losing support systems left and right, and any attempt he's tried to get these emotions under control in a stable environment only ended with the emotions overpowering him and making him causing him to do things that he regrets. And so this is all starting to add up to Steven, and it's getting worse, especially with Steven now believing that he's no better than the Diamonds. So, end result? These episodes are definitely shocking and definitely keep you on the edge of your seat as things continue just to keep getting worse. And things are gonna keep going bad, and things are gonna keep ending badly. So, yeah, on the whole, enjoyed the episodes, but like I said, only gonna get worse from here. So, I hope you tune in next week as we see Steven start to finally hit his limit. As well, let's just say that Steven's not going to be the same kid he was before. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.